So Denise Wise reached out to me through email after watching the Witness Underground interview that I did with Ryan Sutter. So I'll include a clip at the top of that. And at the end of the video also, I'll also include it there so people can see what I'm talking about. It was about a documentary about exJWs that had to do with music. And he went and told his story of how he kind of left the Witnesses and how music kind of saved his life. You know, like he was very creative and things like that. And then I got an email from you, and you said that you had a very similar story of like connections with music and the JW culture.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that existed because I was like, by the time I was born and raised, that was a big no-no. We did not engage in any like band or music or absolutely nothing. We only had Kingdom melodies. You go to your Kingdom hall and that's where you sing. You don't go to concerts. You don't go to artists or anything like that. So I was really fascinated by his story and the documentary. So that's where you came into contact with me. And then we also chatted on Discord. And then I kind of forgot about my interviews because I was doing like a whole bunch of different things on my channel. And then you reached out to me again, like, hey, do you remember that email? And I was like, oh my God, yes. Okay, we have to get this done. So I'm so glad that we reconnected. And I want to start straight. I want to thank you for reminding me to do this because this is what this is what I really want to do. You know what I mean? Like I want to get to know other exJWs, how they woke up, how they moved on, how they incorporated music or like any other creative style that helped them wake up and survive because most of us we don't know what to do. You know, we have never been exposed to anything. Like I was just really in limbo for a really long time. So
Yeah.
I really love to see your generation of exJWs talking to my generation of exJWs and like this is what we did. So I want to go ahead and start with you. Tell me all about yourself. Start from the very beginning.
Well, it's great to be on your show, Ruby, because I've watched a few of your interviews already, and very impressed. Very professional, but fun. And I love the news updates as well with your different coloured wigs for different things. So yeah, that's part of being creative is obviously learning how to have fun. And we didn't have a huge amount of fun, but it was very orchestrated, wasn't it? When I was younger, it was things like going for picnics and playing rounders, which is a very English game. Obviously, I'm from the UK, and or doing a trip to the zoo or something. Anyway, with creativity, I was lucky because my parents before they got divorced, were in a folk circle. So they were singing ye old English folk music, and I was as a toddler, I was exposed to that, and I loved it. And my mum would sing songs around the house, and then later on they divorced, and that's the point where she became interested in Jehovah's Witnesses, and it was like the last straw for my dad, who was an atheist. So off he went, and that's really where it all went wrong as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. I can't relate to that. You know what I mean? Like I was never even exposed to any of that. Never had any sense of culture, sense of self, sense of like family and everything. So
Mm.
that's why when I read your email and you were talking about like the folk music and how your parents played instruments and that back in the day they used to play the instruments in the kingdom halls. It wasn't like the digital
Yeah.
sound booth that they have. They would have like the real piano and they would
Mm.
play it. So you
Yeah,
so
I've been to
you
some
yeah.
halls where they've played piano, and of course we had the all the music scores, didn't we, with the lyrics. So I just was interested in music, and I used to follow along with the music, and therefore learnt how to read music. And I did actually have piano lessons with somebody in the congregation. I was lucky enough to meet somebody who was very talented, and she used to play Beethoven. She was only young, and then she went off to university to do a music degree, and that's where we parted company. And the other thing I did was some singing lessons. So in my small way, I was still trying to do something that I was interested in, but obviously I was a pioneer, became a pioneer at some point when I was 18. So that's severely restricted my time and energy. I still carried on a bit with music, but
Mhm.
before she'd left, this friend had used to have gatherings at our house with round the piano, but we used to sing kingdom songs, of course. Nothing so
Yeah.
but there was always that thread of music, and my mum used to listen to lots of music at home. We did ballet and we did tap, so we had dance music and things like that. And I just then went down that route of full-time pioneering for 10 years, and
Wow.
I just became a bit more and more like Mary Poppins, the the skirts got longer and the necks got higher, and
Yeah.
had to be an example in the congregation. They put you on a bit of a pedestal, don't they?
Yeah.
So that's that that restricted me a lot, really, and I couldn't express myself as much then.
Mhm. Definitely. And so you were a pioneer, 18 years old. What age did you get baptized?
I'd got baptized a couple of years before that, at 16,
Oh, okay.
and I had wanted to do that earlier, but luckily they did say, "No, just wait."
Mhm.
But obviously you don't really know what you're doing at that age.
Right. Okay. So you were pioneering from 18, so for about 10 years. So now you're in your late 20s. And then what happened? Did you step down from being a pioneer, or like
Oh,
how did you
no.
stop being a pioneer?
Well, that was my whole identity by then, and therefore I was looking for a partner at that point, because at 28 you're pretty much on the shelf as a witness, and wondering if you're ever going to meet somebody. And so I did meet somebody who's a lovely guy, and my mom and dad approved of him and everything, but he lived in Switzerland, so I had to make that decision if I was going to get married, that I'd move there and learn a new language. And for me, I guess that was probably where I wasn't on the treadmill anymore.
Mhm.
So I started to um, learn German and learn Swiss German, which is like learning two languages, and I was quite wrapped up with all of that. And so it took me out of that treadmill, and then having my daughter quite early on, I started to see the cracks, and I just thought, "This is ridiculous," having to sit with a child through 2-hour meetings. And
Mhm.
in Switzerland, their weekend meeting was on a Saturday evening, can you believe? So we literally had 3 evening meetings during the week, and
Mhm.
I don't know if they'd stopped doing the Tuesday book studies by your time, but we had 3 meetings a week.
Yeah, I remember doing three a week when I was little, and then they stopped doing it like young adulthood for me. So that was like the 2010s, and
Right.
then yeah, but I was actually kind of sad that they stopped it, because those book study meetings in other people's houses was like the fun meeting, because you would get to go to people's houses, and that was the only time that I was able to go to somebody else's house, and it was because of theocratic reasons. That was the only thing that my mom would let me do. So I was kind of sad that they stopped the smaller group meetings. Yeah.
Well, I know we're probably gonna touch on this later, but I think, I'm not sure about this, one of the reasons is that there was child sex abuse going on, and it was easier to cover up if it was at someone's house, because I
Mm.
think I've heard stories of where children would get lured into another room while everyone else is in the front room chatting, and, that
Mhm.
could be the reason, that they weren't in a formal setting, and it happened more easily.
Oh, that makes sense. Now, I
Mhm.
mean, now that I'm awake to that fact, that
Yeah,
definitely does make sense. They don't want to be liable for having a meeting, like an informal meeting in somebody else's house. So just have it at the Kingdom Hall.
yes. And I knew nothing about that at the time. In fact, I would say I'd only really realised that it was an epidemic when I started to really seriously research towards the end of writing my story. In 2017, I decided, right, now's the time for me to go on some Facebook groups for exJWs. And wow, that was an eye opener because I just hadn't wanted to know up to that point. Um, so I spent the first half of writing a book called Rising from the Ashes of Jehovah's Witnesses, like the phoenix. But the first half was my story that I'm just telling you now, and
Mhm.
then later on I'll tell you what the rest of it was about. But I do go into some of the cases, the court cases, a little bit in there as well.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. So now you're married, you have a child, you're not pioneering anymore. So what happens after that, in that time frame? Did you start waking up?
Yes, well, my body was trying to tell me, as it does. And I started to get sick all the time. I was having a virus or a flu every month, even in the summer. And I went to the doctors, who were pretty good in Switzerland. And then I said, look, do you think this could be psychosomatic? I mean, I was fitting in fairly well, and it was quite supportive. And I'd mastered the language by that time. But I guess my body was just saying, "You're in a trap. You need to get out." And so I said, "Could you, put me forward for some psychotherapy?" Because my husband and I had both been interested in psychotherapy. We'd read a few books before we'd even got married and talked about that a fair amount. And so that was one thing that we had in common, and other things were things like the environment and um, nutrition, So we got on well as friends. But the other side of the marriage, which is the bit that obviously is meant to work, is the physical side, and that wasn't working for me.
Hmm.
Obviously, the reason is because we got married, we were virgins, and unfortunately, in my case, I just didn't feel that it was we were compatible.
Hmm.
And so after a couple of years, my body was starting to say, "Look, you know, this isn't right for you." So I said, "Can you put me forward?" And I'd chosen a really good type of psychotherapy, which I now realize was a real blessing because it was body and speaking therapy. So it was called bioenergetics. And it's Alexander Lowen is the guy that wrote quite a few books about it. And he had taken his material from Reich, Wilhelm Reich, and then before him would have been Jung. So it was quite metaphysical type of therapy where you had to stretch your body into all sorts of weird contortions to let
Hmm.
emotions out of the body. And
Hmm.
so I think that's brilliant for someone who's been suppressed and repressed by a religion
Hmm.
like that. And so there lots of emotions would rise up, and we'd talk about that. And I said right from the beginning, I don't want to talk about my religion because that's not the problem. It's the marriage that, I think there's something wrong with me, was how I was.
Mm.
So she was very clever and didn't talk about religion at all. But she then encouraged me because I was starting to do some silk painting. So here's the creative side of me starting to come out again. And I was changing the colours I was using. It was getting bolder and bolder. And in the end, I was using um, red. I was painting red poppies on a black background. And she was like, "Oh, that's really interesting," and analysing the colours. And I loved it. And so through that, she then rebuilt, I would say, a core sense of self, which is the thing that the witnesses take away from you through the brainwashing and the undue influence. So you
Mhm.
have that sense of connection to your instinct and what you really think about things, your gut instinct. and it took me many years to develop that after I'd left. But I obviously had started using it, sort of my body was I was listening to my body when it was complaining, I was listening to it. And, yeah, eventually she sort of subtly at the end of 2 years, I think it was, she gave me a book called, Women and Religion, and this was written by a clergywoman in Europe, and her name's Mariella Franzmann, and she'd gone down to Jerusalem with other clergymen, and she was appalled at the way that she was treated as a woman differently from her colleagues. They wouldn't speak to her on the street or, shake her hand, because in case she was menstruating and unclean. It's that whole Israelite thing that we know about from the Bible. We have to go outside the camp.
Yep. Mhm.
And so she came back to her position in the church and decided she would do some reforming, and she wrote this book. And it just had a passage in it about Adam and Eve. And
Mhm.
she said, "Do you know, really, all the issues that women have suffered have stemmed from that original story." And it was just like a red rag to a bull. I suddenly went, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe that I'm allowing myself to be told what to do all the time by a bunch of old men," 'cause there's obviously 8, members of the governing body, and then all the different tiers, of men, elders and ministerial servants, and of course, women can't become, they
Mhm.
can't teach in the congregation, can they? So we can give talks, but not to the congregation, and very much knew our place. Man was the head of the house if you were married. And so I just had this massive paradigm shift, and it was almost like the horizon just suddenly widened out in front of me. And like, they used to talk about the scales falling off your eyes in the Bible, actually. It was very much like that.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah,
Uh,
that's amazing.
yeah, so I had this paradigm shift where I suddenly realized, "What the hell? I don't have to do this anymore." And so I stopped going, I just stopped going, and all my family in England are witnesses at the time, and all of my husband's family. He was born in, and I was probably 10 when my mum converted, but so all his family, his
Mhm.
brothers and parents were witnesses. But I didn't think twice about it. I now know that I'm a Sagittarius, okay? And when a Sagittarius decides to do something, they just do it. So I didn't know anything about myself at the time, but I've since learned loads from being around other fun-loving Sagittarians. Um, so I just walked away, and I told him my husband wasn't gonna go anymore, and he was okay with me, and he just let me do my own thing. So he kept going to the meetings with our daughter, who was only very young at the time,
Mhm.
2, 3 years old. And then I just realized this isn't gonna work. After about 6 months of, enjoying my time off, I realized that it was more than that, that I was gonna have to make some really tough decisions, and that I needed to go home to England. And, of course, that then meant I had to decide, that I would bring Chantal, my daughter, with me, and, obviously that upset my husband, but he had to accept that at the time. And so, I just came back to England. But in the meantime, as you know, you can't just walk away when you're married. You have to have some kind
Yep.
of excuse, because not that I would have wanted to get remarried, and I haven't in
Mhm.
30 years, but you always feel bad for the person that you're leaving behind in the witnesses, because if you don't commit adultery, basically, they can't get remarried,
Yep.
right? So I knew that I was gonna have to come up with some kind of a thing. Ridiculous.
Wow.
So I did meet somebody, and I was just harmlessly kind of dating him, and, I lied about it. I basically said I was having an affair so that I was off the hook.
If you have seen the interview I did with Stephanie Wright,
I did.
that's exactly what we talked about. I
I
said, how
know.
many women think that they have to make up an excuse or they actually do commit the sin because they don't want to lie? Once
Mm,
again, Jehovah's Witnesses don't want to lie. But they make the excuse like, oh, I have to do this so that I can have a biblical, like a scriptural divorce, and then
mm,
they end up doing something they really didn't want to do, or like you just said, you would rather lie about it because then that would leave him free to remarry, and you
mm,
feel bad that you want to open up the door for him as well because you already know you want out. But it's
mm.
like, why do we feel that need?
Yeah.
And that's the JW culture, when you could have just gotten a regular divorce just because
Mm,
you wanted to, whatever reason was your reasoning. That is as simple as that. But it's
mm.
like you have to give a reason, and that's sick.
Yeah.
That's sickening for me.
So the control goes all the way through, as we know.
Hmm.
And so the elders came round to have a little chat with me, as they do. And I decided that I was going to not tell them anything, even though my husband had already told them what had
Hmm.
happened. And funnily enough, I mean, I was having a little fling, I suppose you'd call it, with a guy who was from the village. And he ended up feeling too guilty to kind of have full on relations, as they call it in the Bible. um, so he was from a Catholic family, and he felt really bad because he knew my situation.
Yup.
So yeah, trust me to find another religious one. Anyway, I said that, I just denied all knowledge of it, and they thought I was lying. And they said, well, you've got one of two choices. Either we'll disfellowship you on your husband's word, or you can disassociate yourself. I said, right, I'm disassociating myself, thank you.
Yup.
And I felt quite empowered because I'd made the decision myself and
Good.
walked away. And I knew then, obviously, that all the people I'd grown up with in my youth back home, and at the time, all of my family was still witnesses.
Mhm.
And it really didn't bother me. I was just, "I'm out of here." You know? It was a bit like,
Yeah.
"Open the gate, the horse has bolted, and it's not turning back."
Mhm. Yeah. Wow, I relate to that so much, and that's
Yeah,
something that I regret. I wish I would have taken that power into from the very beginning, saying that this is my decision. I want to disassociate myself and not fight for that like validation. Like
mm,
I woke up and I'm telling you the truth, and then they're denying it, and I'm like trying to prove myself. Like yes, I'm right and you're wrong. So I kind of do regret that, but I'm so happy that
mm,
you disassociated yourself and you took that from step one. You took that away from them, from like the like the repercussions of your actions. We're gonna
yeah,
disfellowship you and you're gonna be announced. And it's like that public humiliation. But at the same time, they're gonna treat you the exact same way, even if you are DF or you're
yeah,
disassociated. So what's the difference?
I know. And I've watched other members of my family, and, my ex-husband left, luckily, as well, after me. But about 6 months later, when I was still in England by that time, and he thanks me for getting him out. He said, "I never would
Really?
have. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have left." So we're still good friends, and we've supported each other over the last 30 years. Bit of solidarity there still. And so what happened was I came back to England, and I was lucky because my father had never been a witness. So
Hmm.
he was there in the background.
Hmm.
He was just waiting for me to come to my senses and make a sensible decision. He was delighted, of the choice, and they supported me, and he had, 2 sons, so that I've got half brothers as well. And so, yeah, that worked out pretty well, and I, started to work and find friends and do things like go to the gym, and just made friends there, and I would always recommend joining things, as soon as you come out.
Right.
I walked into a spiritualist church because I thought, "What's the worst thing that I could do that would really tick them?" And I kinda really enjoyed it because I thought, it's so different because the people are just coming up to you personally and saying, "I've got a message for you.
Mhm.
It's from your grandparents," and they described them, and I was like, "Yeah, they actually did look like that, and that was their personality. This is
Mhm.
my birth father's parents." And so there was never any judgment about anything you did, but it was always really positive, like, really supportive. And although I didn't get involved, because I was well aware of not getting involved with a cult or anything
Mhm.
controlling, that was something that I did keep an interest in over the years, and I've explored lots of different avenues of spirituality. But I just made lots of friends like that, and I started to go out and explore London, the big city.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, and
Um,
my f the with the music, I know you wanted to know where I started to pick it up again. I started to do some workshops, and they were called the Zen of Seeing. So they were spiritual development, but also you could just tune into, like, crystals or plants or whatever, and then do some automatic writing, which
mhm.
is when you don't look at the paper or your hand, and you just tune into this object, and you just whatever comes into your brain, you're kind of downloading it, and you just write on the paper. And I started writing these funny little poems at first, and
Mhm.
then it started to rhyme, and I thought, "I could write songs." So I started to write lyrics, and then as I was walking along to work, commuting, I'd have, a little tape recorder in those days because we didn't have mobiles, and I'd
Mhm.
just get a tune in my head, and I'd think, "Oh, I've got to record that now, before I forget it." And that's how I started writing songs.
Wow.
Eh
I am identifying that the very first introduction to that therapy that you described, that psychotherapy, kind of opened your mind
mm,
without you even knowing from the very beginning. And then it was that very like that quote that kind of woke you up. It was like that one little passage that woke you up, and that
mm,
allowed you to open up yourself to the whole world around you, because it's like everything is already out there, but you never took that first step to engage in
mm,
those activities. And it was until you woke up that you finally allowed yourself to do something that we would never do in a
yeah,
million years. And then you found a little a little hack about yourself that you were good at something, and you were it was like you were smart enough to say, I'm going to jump on this. Because a lot of people don't really jump on the creative side. That
mm,
part of your brain doesn't really open up because there's just so much trauma or like emotional things blocking that. And it's like once you got rid of that, you opened up yourself to that
mm,
creative side. And you did, and that exercise that you just described, even to me, it sounds a little like, oh, is that a little bit, oh,
mm.
Satan or demonic? Oh, why are you staring at objects for? like, like
Opening
it,
up your mind, the demons are gonna get in.
yes, and it helped you. So
Yeah.
that's amazing. Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
Continue describing your musical journey.
Well, because I discovered that, I then got a real interest in wanting to sing, and I'd managed to find some work in London by this time because I was living outside of the city. And, my sister, bless her, she'd tried to carry on in the witnesses, and she was at her wit's end as well. So she left 3 years after I did, and I got this great phone call one day when I was at work saying, "I've left the witnesses, I've got my own flat, and I'm seeing somebody." And
Wow.
oh, this is just like the best news ever. And I just got in the car and drove up to London. And so ever since then, we've been back to how we were before, which was we were always very close, you know?
Mhm.
And so I went up, kind of graduated up to London, worked up there, lived with my sister, started going out and being party animals. You know, we'd go for drinks after work and then we'd have parties with all our friends. And I never looked back, and I got a job in the music industry 'cause, I I was a PA, a personal assistant at the time, and I just applied for this role in music royalties, and it's actually an American company called
Mhm.
BMI, and they're a really huge, royalties company in America
Mhm.
next to ASCAP, which is probably as well known. And so they just had this pilot office in a very nice, building, and there were just 5 of us. So we used to get invited to all these showcases and award ceremonies in posh hotels in London, and we were mixing with people that were coming, writers from all over the world who do their music royalties, and then maybe go and take their guitars and sit in the boardroom and do some co-writing together, you know?
Mhm.
Started to feel, "Oh, this is how it's done. Oh, this is interesting," you know, and
Mhm.
helping people, I learned the ropes. And so I met somebody who had a studio who's a professional, and he's worked with people like Boy George and Debbie Harry when she had her comeback, and lots of other, you know, well-known artists through his career. And I was introduced to him through a friend who was a singing teacher of mine. And she said, "Oh, I'm sure he'll do mates rates for you if you want to record a couple of songs in the studio." So luckily for me, my dad had just gifted us some money, and so I felt that was the best, you know, money that I'd ever spent on myself, was to go in the studio and write
Nice.
2 songs, you know, and he produced the whole thing, and I had these lovely demos, you know, and I felt so proud of myself. That was just amazing. I loved every minute.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I've heard lots of other exJWs describe that same moment. It's like they finally did something for themselves. And that's another thing that I felt so like controlled. Like I couldn't even wear the clothes that I wanted to wear. That's a form of expression. I couldn't listen to the type of music I wanted to listen to, and let alone do something like what you just described. So once you come out of that, it's like you finally get to do something for yourself. And that is amazing. It's like you got that record, you got that demo, you got that experience. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
that's right. And well, you know, you're wearing your different wigs now, so you're expressing yourself in that way.
Exactly why I do it. It's so
Oh,
much fun, and I
mhm,
used to love wearing because my mom she would tell me you can't dye your hair different colors because that's whirly, and I
mm,
said, but I want black, I want blonde, like I want to express myself. And I was like 16, 15, 16, and she wouldn't really let me wear makeup because that was another thing. Oh, you're gonna look like a whore in the kingdom hall, so you can't wear makeup, can't wear heels, can't dye my hair. And I
mm,
was like, so you gotta get. I'm looking at her like, so what am I gonna do? Look bland for the rest of my life? Like I was depressed. And so she said, well, I guess we could buy you a wig and then you could have fun with it at home and just play with it at home. You don't have to wear it outside. So
mm,
that's how I really was. I was a closeted person within my home. Once I left my house, I couldn't be myself. But once I was home, I was myself. I put the wigs on, I put the makeup on, and I was like a total different person.
yeah,
And but she would not let me walk out the house like that. So I was a very homebody, like very introverted person. I mean, I didn't want to be around other people because I would have to take everything off to, to be a
mm,
Jehovah's Witness outside.
yeah. So then you're
So
like naked, you know, having to go out without any makeup on. Well,
yeah.
we used to get told off all the time when we were younger,
Hmm.
by the other elders' wives. You know, my mum was an elder's wife
Oh,
at the
oh
time.
my God. Yup. I hated them. I'm sorry, but I hated them. I was like, once I knew that elder's wife was coming around, I would turn around and I would walk the other way because I'm like, anything that you're wearing is illegal. You did something, it was illegal, and then she would tell my mom, and then I'm like, are you
Mm.
serious? You're really gonna listen to somebody else on what to tell your own kid? Like, oh, it was just so frustrating.
Well, my mum liked her clothes and her makeup and her nail varnish, okay? So
Hmm.
she would tell us what they'd said, but she would just nod to us and we were allowed to do it. But we had to kind of just tone it down a bit. So we did dye our hair and we did wear makeup. But I mean, obviously, we're now probably 15, 16. And also, I think because she's an artist and a teacher, so she had some kind of sense of being your own person before she became a witness, and she was
Hmm.
creative. She taught and modelled. She was also an artist model when she was in art college. So, she'd already had that exposure
Hmm.
to art, and she could see that we were just being creative. So thanks to her for that.
Hmm.
It was the 70s and the 80s where they used to wear those pencil skirts with the split up the side
Hmm.
and then really high stilettos.
Hmm.
Just all the rage, and we'd try and get away with as much as we could. But, yeah, they would try it on and we'd get called things like brazen,
Yep, that exactly
big
right. Yep. Yep.
word. And also once I was even criticised for knowing how to use my eyes, you know,
What?
and I was so innocent, I didn't even know what I was doing.
Right.
But I must have just, glanced, and then one of them was like, "Oh, your daughter knows how to use her eyes, doesn't she?" Implying what, you know?
Wow.
So
That's insane. Yeah.
it's insane, and the thing I noticed, when I had that, paradigm shift,
Hmm.
somebody came round to see me that wasn't a witness, and I had been studying with her for a while, and she knew that I'd left, and she looked at me and she said, "Wow, your eyes look really blue today." And I said, "Do you know what? I just feel alive." She said, "That must be what it is." So it was
Mhm.
almost like I was looking for the first time. I was able to hold eye contact and look the way that I wanted to look at somebody and
Mhm.
start expressing my true emotions rather than having a mask on, which is obviously what happened, isn't it?
Mhm.
So that came off pretty quick, that mask. But yeah, it took a few years initially, but I soon got the hang of it.
Yeah. Wow. So you recorded your few demos and you was exposed to the networking of like that music world. And so what happened after that?
Well, of course, I was mixing with musicians, so I dated a few musicians, and it's fun. And did some underground gigs, and um, just basically had a really, really fun time. Got into clubbing. We'd never been allowed to go to what we called
Oh
disco
yeah.
in those days. Weren't allowed to go,
Mhm.
and we had friends that would get away with it because maybe their one parent was a witness and the other one wasn't, and they'd be allowed to do more than us.
Mhm.
And we'd be so jealous, just because we
Yeah.
loved dancing, and but the only times we could do that was house parties or witness weddings,
Yep.
you know, and then we'd
Mhm.
all get down dancing away to things like Celebration.
Mhm.
Loved soul funk. When we went to London, there's a lot of black congregations there, and
Mhm.
we'd made friends with quite a few of them, so we'd get invited to all these parties where they'd play soul funk, and we really, like, got packed. The house would be packed, and we'd all be moving as one in a great big group of us, and
Oh,
that
I love their
yeah,
parties. The Hispanic community and the black community. those
Mm,
were the most fun parties
yeah,
ever and the most like diverse people in the party. Like you would be meeting people from different districts and we're
yeah,
like, yo, you came all the way from Jersey? Like,
yeah,
different states were coming for these kind of
yeah.
parties.
Well, we did have some fun, we managed to do that, um, in our sort of late teens and early 20s.
Mhm.
But, so that side of me, my sister and I, well, my stepfather, an elder, he knew what we were like because he'd answer the telephone, because in those days you'd had have the telephone on the side in the hall, wouldn't you? And he'd pick it up and go, "House of the Party Seekers," or something like that. So
Mhm.
he knew what we were like. We were a bit irrepressible. So, of course, once we were both out of the witnesses, living in London, starting to go out, going clubbing
Mhm.
in our 30s, we were just having our second youth, that, we were just loving
Yeah.
it. It was great.
That's exactly how I feel. Like I am doing things that I probably would have done as a teenager, but I'm 28 now. So it's like I finally get to experience these things and I'm in there like, wow, like I'm looking at this for the very first time. Like I am like a brand new person.
I know, it's, like being a kid in the sweetie shop for sure. And
Mhm.
and then we went to Ibiza, and, we did all the beaches and the clubs with all our girlfriends, and, those were just such an amazing years, and we just carried on doing that through our
Yep.
40s as well. And you
Oh,
do.
that's amazing. I love it. It's like you're finally single because that's another thing. You got married at a very young age. I did too. I was 17 when I got married. So I didn't have a life. I didn't have an identity even after leaving the witnesses. So
Mm,
that's another cultural thing about the JWs. You're stuck to this person. Then you have a child at a very young age. You're stuck to raising a child. So it's like you never actually get to live your life. Even if you
yeah,
do wake, it's like you're still stuck by like responsibilities. So it's like you struggle with that because you know it's the right thing, to be a mom, a wife, or whatever. But you got to experience that single life, but at an older age, and
yeah.
you are like living it up. It's like a movie almost. It's like all these movies that we see, these women living their life, and I love it.
Mm. I mean, obviously, the trauma was still there, but I was masking it. I was going out drinking, having a great time. And it does come up for healing and to bite you in the bum,
Yep.
usually in relationships. You realise you perhaps haven't worked on yourself as much as you thought you had. And so there was what I now understand is religious trauma or religious PTSD, even.
Oh yes.
But I didn't know that. I didn't know that for a long time about myself. And
Mhm.
I've done a lot of healing even since in the last decade, actually, around that. And finally let go and done the forgiveness thing. I couldn't forgive, for my parents for shunning me, really. Deep down, I could never forgive them, even though I knew what I was doing. And I managed to do some work around on myself, to do with things that I discovered since I moved away from London 10 years ago. I started to write another book because I'd published the first one eventually. And then I thought, great, now I'm free to just write whatever I want to write. I've done the
Mhm.
heavy stuff, and I felt obligated to tell my story in some way. But then when I wrote the second book, it was much more things that I'd discovered myself and felt really excited about. And then, that really led me um, to find out loads about history. I was writing about ancient medieval buildings and castles, and that's where I live.
Oh, I love that stuff. Oh my God, I love it. Yeah.
So that really brought that side out. So I quietened down. I wasn't doing the partying so much in the last uh,
Mhm.
10 years, but I was, yeah, exploring other areas. And then I started to realize that I believed in reincarnation, because I was starting to have these clues and keys that were leading me to feel that I'd lived there before. And
Mhm.
I discovered two or three different lives in that town in medieval times. And I'd lived on or near or worked near to some of these places where these past lives had been, I started to
Mhm.
realize there was a pattern. And, our brain does look for patterns, but nobody's works quite like mine. I was starting to see
Mhm.
patterns where no one else was seeing them. But I've developed this whole theory around it, and it's my very own concoction. Nobody's dictating to me about how it should look and how I should discover these things. So I loved it. And so I've written, a second book about that, actually.
Wow, that's super interesting. I mean, I after I woke up, I went through a few phases myself. Like I was an atheist, and then I started believing in like wild things for a while. And one of those wild things, in my opinion, was reincarnation. I said,
Okay.
what if when we die or something, we come back as something else, or maybe a different person, or like do we have a soul, are we a soul, like those questions about soul would come up. And then Disney came out with a movie literally called Soul, and when we watched that movie, it was like his soul got transferred into an animal for a little bit in that movie, and but nobody knew that he was in the animal, and he was fighting for his soul to come back to his human body. And that whole cartoon literally was affecting me, and I'm like, this is a Disney cartoon, why is it hurting me so much? And
Yeah.
by the end of that movie, we were crying because it kind of like deconstructed those things for us, that like we're a human, we are a soul, we're going to go to heaven or we're not, or hell, heaven and hell and things like that. So all of those contracts came crashing down when I saw that movie, and I've kind of had to rebuild that. And I struggle with that religious trauma that you just brought up. That's why I'm so happy that you brought it up,
Mm.
because I am dealing with that. So I feel like I'm in phase two. Phase two is realizing all of that religious PTSD, and I will literally shake and I get goosebumps and I start sweating when I go to the church, and I'm looking at all of these icons of Jesus and representations, symbolism, and it's like all of those things. It's a big struggle, but I'm pushing myself to a mental boundary that I would have never thought I would be doing the cross, or I would be looking at different things that symbolize something in the spiritual world, or the afterlife, or like what
Mm.
happens to us when we die. And that really interests me still, and I struggle with it. But I'm glad you brought that up because that's very interesting. I definitely want to read that book.
Yes. Well, this book is called Past Lives That Matter: How to Heal, Remember, and Heal Them. And it's basically showing that we remember certain past lives for a
Mhm.
reason. And that's because we've been through something similar before, and we've got like a blueprint which is affecting our lives every
Mhm.
time we come back. And guess what I discovered, which is what helped me to forgive my mother in the end?
Mhm.
We'd been in the past life together, and she had been shunned by her father because of
Mm.
her character in the Tudor court with Henry VIII, you know, that very famous part of history that everyone seems to love. But I'd stumbled across it quite by accident because the two girls, Anne Boleyn and Mary, her sister.
Mhm.
Anne Boleyn was the infamous one, that um, was his second wife, and they
Mhm.
were born not far from here where I live. And so I'd looked into the history. I'd been to visit Blickling Hall where they were supposed to have been born, and then I'd been following other clues, and I'd discovered that I they'd moved down to the area that I'd lived in later on in my life, and I was again 20 minutes from where they lived.
Mhm.
And I started to realise that life had taken me to these spots near castles because they went and lived in a castle called Hever Castle in Kent, and that was not 20 minutes from where I lived when I came back from Switzerland. And I must have had about 4 or 5 different location synchronicities is what I call them. And then other clues like my date of birth kept cropping up, or other people around me, their date of birth would match to a significant date in their past life. So, for instance, it would be maybe their date of death would be the same year, only a few centuries earlier. But the most stunning example was I'd realised that my first husband was actually my first husband in Mary Boleyn's life, and that we were married on the same day.
Whoa.
So we
Wow,
were married
that's so interesting.
on the 4th of February, and Mary Boleyn and her first husband were married on the 4th of February, some 400 years earlier. So I thought, there's another pattern. So that was numerology coming in. And then
Mm,
there was instances like, I discovered that my mother had been this character where her date of birth is the same date of death as her character in Henry VIII's court, and that he had shunned her before that because he'd divorced her mother,
mhm,
the queen, and he was very spiteful. He'd sent the daughter, Princess Mary, away, separated her from her. He was divorcing Catherine of Aragon, sending her one direction, and she had to live in this castle somewhere. And then he
mhm,
sent the daughter to um, a big manor house away from her mother, and he forbade them to have any contact. Now, why would he do that? I mean, honestly, there's no rhyme or reason. But it meant that my mother had then experienced being sent away, lost communication with her mother. And it was only because of the goodwill of the servants who loved the first queen that they took secret letters and would pass them between mother and daughter. And so that's a bit like my mother and I, although she's not allowed to really, but she
mhm,
text each other on WhatsApp.
mhm,
And so every few months I'll take the initiative and my sister does the same. And so although we've not seen her socially for many years, we do have some kind of contact. And so I could see this whole pattern, and I thought, do you know what? I've got to break this pattern. I've got to heal from this wound because it had also happened to me in that past life for different reasons. And I thought, wow, there's all these patterns here that I need to release. So I developed this protocol, which I'd been learning over the years about how to call in protection and then do some getting rid of old contracts, we call them, and different things that you've promised in the past life that need breaking, because sometimes beliefs of reincarnation, they believe in energy and that you can pass like an energetic contract to down through your ancestors even. So things that your ancestors have done can still affect you energetically in future lives. So that's really where that's how I developed, and I started to do that for myself, and then I started to find other people in my family and friends who were in my stories. And so those who are awake and willing, I've done the protocol to free them from their past life patterns as well.
wow, that
Yeah.
is super duper interesting.
So I call myself the past life detective because it really is different. I don't put people in hypnosis or regression. I literally just go, tell me your date of birth, where were you born, and have you ever been anywhere that's made all the hairs go up on you? And I'll just take a few clues and then I'll run with it. And then I
Mhm.
quite will find their character and then work out if there's anything that needs clearing.
Wow, yeah. So that's kind of like the healing process for yourself, right?
Mm,
Because you finally forgave your mom, you made some connections,
mm,
and then that was also a door, like another doorway to help other people, because that might be something that can give closure almost, right? Like to close this off, to understand, like to make sense of something that
yeah.
doesn't make sense. Because that's how I feel too. I'm like, why all of a sudden yesterday everything made sense, but today nothing made sense and everybody's attacking you and
Mm,
you're still in this confusion. You don't understand yet. And then it took 5 years for me to finally understand that. And I just kept like quiet because I didn't want to say or do anything that would make these people attack you more, because you feel like they have the power, they have the truth, and you don't. And
mm,
if you do go into the territory of what you're speaking about, they're gonna be like, "That's demonic. You don't even know what you're talking about. Like that's not gonna make sense to them." But
mm,
ever since I let go of that, and it is the religious trauma because it's like Christianity kind of dictated my thoughts, my worldview, like who I was, my identity. Once I got rid of that and I was an atheist for a little bit, it kind of allowed me to do things that I wouldn't do. I said, "Have you ever spoken to a medium or like a psychic, or have
mm,
you ever talked to somebody like what you just described, people who can have like the sixth sense,
mm,
or watch movies that can bring parallels up." Like there's a lot of psychological thrillers that I've watched and it kind of like leaves you stunned for a few days, and then I go back. So it's like I go back to the what's safe, mentally safe. I go back into that corner that's safe. But every
mm,
once in a while I leave that safe corner and I go into the territory of what you're talking about,
yeah.
and I don't really like beat myself up over it. I kind of just say, "Oh, this is for educational purpose." I try to lie to myself and say, "I'm just trying to learn what like different perspectives," and it kind of works. Like I'm so interested in everything you've just described, because as soon as I started researching and looking on the internet of what do I like to do, what are my interests,
Mm,
everything that you just described about the King Henry, about England, about locations, about dates, I have such a like drawing. I am drawn to European history and like the monarchy and
yeah.
British history. And I'm like, why am I so like hung up over the royal family? Like I would just go up into the family tree and I would watch all these videos about history, the queens, why they died, and like everything that you just described.
Mm,
I follow so many like royal news and royal like YouTube channels, and I love it. And I feel like I am stuck in the modern era, but my mind and my heart, I feel like I belong in the 1800s, like Jane Austen, Pride
right.
and Prejudice,
O
like I think it's like the Victorian era.
okay.
And then I look at like American history, like 1776, the Revolutionary War, and I also feel stuck in that time frame. Like all of my values that I have now are the same values that they had back then, like very patriotic, very like, fighting for America. But then I
Mm,
also have this love for the English, and I'm like, yo, what the heck is wrong with me? I feel like I am in both places at the same time, that
yes.
I can take my mind out of 2024 and I can go into a dream that I lived back then. And I used to be so like heavily influenced by 1800 style movies and books and
Mm,
literature and just culture of the 1800s, that I just love it so much. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
yes. Well, this is an absolute indicator for you that you've definitely had past lives in those times. I would say I didn't have those feelings, but the fact that you have is a really strong indicator, and I'm gonna have to do some exploring for you off the
That
record.
would be so interesting.
Yeah.
I would answer all of your questions, I don't care,
Mm,
because I just love it so much. I think it's also a love for history, a
yes.
love for like countries and wars, and I watch so many TV shows of like Queen Mary, like you described, like all of these different kings and queens. I love it so much. I mean, I don't want to live in those times, but I mean like I enjoy it.
Mm. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, the people that I've had a couple of clients come to me, one from Australia and one from the US, who have been drawn to come to England, and maybe a few years ago, or maybe many years ago in the case of the other one. And both of them were drawn to go to certain places like the Tower of London, which a lot of tourists will go to, of course, where people were all sent, to be executed. And then this one lady was sent to a manor house in Middle England, which I'd never been to. And she said, "Oh, I had this really funny feeling, like it wasn't a bad feeling, but I just felt it was so familiar. And I visited loads of places, but I really felt strongly there." Anyway, I just took her date of birth and a few other clues. And I went away and I just let myself be guided with my instinct. And I discovered what I thought was her past life. And I thought, I wonder if she lived in that manor house as this character. So I do loads of research when I'm doing these. And then I suddenly looked down the list of all the places she was kept when she was in house arrest by the Queen of England. And she was in house arrest for 16 years. So they'd moved her around to different places. And one of them was this manor house where she'd visited. And I said, "Yeah, you did have a good time at that manor house because you befriended the lady of the house and you used to do arts and crafts together. So I think that was quite a happy time for you there." And, that quite a few of them, unfortunately, met the sorry end. So it seems that people that I work with have often been executed, I'm afraid. And that's why they've come to me. They've been drawn to me because I then do this release work with them around the trauma of dying, in that way. And so, yeah, I haven't actually been executed myself so far that I know of in those times. But, I'm quite happy to help people who I discover have, either been hung or had their head chopped off for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's the only reason why I'm like, I do not want to live there, but I am totally drawn to it. Like I always talk about it. I say, when I'm done raising my kids, I would definitely take a trip to England, and I would go and see Jane Austen's life. Like, I love her. I love her and her books, all her stories. I would
Yeah,
want to see where she lived, where she went to church, like all of those historical sites. I want to see the Buckingham Palace and like just the history of it all. I love it so much.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for
yeah.
bringing that up. That
You'll have
was
to
nice.
manifest it. Manifest it by just, yeah, put it out there, put the thought out there and keep an open mind. And, I've done that several times and almost by miracles, the money has suddenly appeared and I've been able to do the thing. It's been really bizarre. In fact, I've written about that in my book, where the
Yes.
money just sort of come in an envelope, from the bank or something unexpected. And then you've put your thought out there of something like, I wanted to go on this retreat, and they
Mhm,
got the exact amount of money on this check that I needed to go on this retreat abroad in Costa Rica.
mhm,
And so I do believe in little miracles, you can
mhm.
have a lot of little miracles. All you have to do is open your mind and change your perspective, like we were saying earlier. No longer have the blinkers on and just be
Mhm,
really open to things. And I'm not saying be naive, but I'm just,
mhm.
explore and be inquisitive and ask questions. And that's, it's brought me a lot of joy, and peace, I guess, is another thing. I found
Mhm.
quiet peace in knowing what I think, and and finding that the world is a much more magical place than I thought it was, and much
Yeah.
more interesting as well. So,
Yeah, you finally got to know yourself,
mm,
and then that translates into helping others, because once you know yourself, you walk around the world with a completely different outlook in life, and people are looking to you like, wow, you're so smart, so intuitive, like you know things. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I just wing my life every single day. I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but people can tell. It's like that glow that you were talking about before. Your
Mm.
eyes were bluer than usual. It's like you live completely different because you're so free and you know yourself now. That's where I want to get. I want to get there. I want to know myself enough, like so that I can just branch out into different things because I'm still afraid of a lot of things. Like I'm still scared. I still don't put myself as much as I want to, but little by little through the internet is how I'm doing it. So I want to do that in real life.
You're rocking it. You know, you've got loads of followers and you do these really professional shows that are really interesting. And, you know, that's way more than I done. Well, I haven't got much of a following at the moment, but, you know, I did the writing instead. But, you know, you doing a show is just as creative and as much fun as well, I can imagine. And, you know, you're doing really well. It's great. So
Yeah,
keep
thank
going.
you. I'm so happy.
Keep going and doing more, yeah. And, be open to new ideas that come in.
Yep. Yep. So let me know where we can find you. Like, do you have any social media? Oh, I do. Oh, okay. I remember. You have the link tree, which has all of
Yeah.
your socials in like one platform.
Mm. That is, yes, so it's Linktree dot ee. So the tree part is got a dot in the middle, and then it's .com and / Denise Wise. So,
Nice.
yeah, so it's quite easy to remember. And also, um, in the lockdown, I met a rock musician who was out of work because of the lockdowns, and
Mhm.
we, resurrected my interest in music.
Oh, is that your partner? And like in the
No,
music
no, he's
videos?
my bandmate, and we're called Peaceful Cacophony because we're like black and white, chalk and cheese, but we just musically, we just really hit it off. And um, over that summer of the lockdowns, we wrote a whole album of songs. And so my creativity took off yet again, you know, and
Hmm.
so that's we've got our fourth single out that's just been released, and that's called Ultimately Nothing Really Ends. Uh,
Mm.
it's filmed with me flitting around in a graveyard.
I love it. I love the indie type of music you guys do. It's very free. It's very like it's like you, but in a song. You know, like it's the person just in a song, and I love it. I love the creativity and just the way it's shot. It seems like so like homemade. It feels like something that any one of us can do. Like it's not super like CGI or whatever. You know, like how like these Hollywood people are. Like it's not like that, and I love that. I love that aspect of it.
Yes, we've always done videos with all four of our tracks, and then so they're on our YouTube, which is all on that link tree. And then Peaceful Cacophony is also on Bandcamp, where you can actually buy the track to download for it's a pound English, so I guess it's about $130 per track. And,
Mhm.
you know, we just like to put it out there and just have fun with it, really. It's just great. David's, you know, he's got projects now, but during that time, you know, he just loved it. He said, "Oh, it's great. It's just given me a new lease of life," because he'd been a professional rock musician. His name's David Donnelly, and he'd played with some really big bands. He'd been a session musician who was just called up to go on tours with some really big bands like he loved the Sex Pistols, you know, in back in the day, and then he met Glenn Matlock, who was in the Sex Pistols but started his own band called the Philistines. And so he was touring the world with him, and then he got to meet other, you know, really well-known musicians as well. So by the time I met him, he was you know, he could play all the instruments, do all the recording and everything, and I just used to write and sing.
Mhm.
So I did the
Nice.
so yeah, that's the project that's still ongoing because we wrote about 11 songs, so still got plenty to
Wow.
do.
Yeah, so you're a singer now, right? You're a
Mhm.
songwriter, you're a singer, you're an author.
Yeah, and that's really what brings me joy, is just to be creative and just to express myself, and what more can you ask, really? That's really for me, that's the meaning of life, because I haven't gone on and got married again, and my daughter's, going to be 34, and I don't have those kind of responsibilities. So for me, my creativity is what I pour my heart into. I love it.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. What a wonderful story. What a wonderful, it's like a successful XJW aftermath, like life story. It's like I'm coming across so many people that have overcome all of those hurdles, healed from that trauma, forgave all of that, like put it behind you, and then you accelerated forward. It's like fast forward into what you wanted to do. And I feel like I'm right in the middle, in between that stage in life where I'm getting rid of something and then I'm almost about to dive myself into something really big that I
Mm,
can pour myself into that with energy, like you said before. I believe in all of those things, like your that you can manifest your thoughts into reality. You can use your energy for good things.
mm,
I believe in a lot of those things. So I'm glad that we had this little conversation, because I think many other people, like regardless if they're an XJW, it's just a life story. You know what I mean? Like I love listening to people's life story. So I want to
mm.
thank you so much for doing this with me.
Oh, it's been fantastic. I've enjoyed chatting to you, and I really wish you all the best with your projects as well. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do too, Ruby.
I think I'm here to stay. I think I'm going to continue making videos and just help the community, because that's my goal. It's like, yes, we all came from the same thing. Congratulations, you're free. But let's move on to something else.
Mm,
And I've been pushing the limits. I've been talking about politics. I've been talking about religion. I've been talking about how other people move on, doing interviews, doing the little book club. So
yeah.
I want to feature your book in a separate video and go like dive. I want to read it and then dive into it. Like that's why I'm pushing the limits a little bit. So I'm making the uncomfortable, the little parts of the community that are a little uncomfortable, I'm pushing that. And so
Mm,
I'm happy that I am, because I'm kind of breaking through that barrier, because nobody
yeah.
really wants to do what I'm doing. But I'm bold enough to do it. So I'm kind of happy that I'm doing it. So that's
You are.
my goal.
That's, I love it. You're smashing all the taboos.
Yeah,
That's great.
definitely.
Well done.
Running up the dark escalator, living in the now, fearful of later. At least I wake up and I am loved. I know it's really down below, but I'm looking above. I'm dying for the truth that takes me on. I was trying to know the world ends. And if you're broken, like it's over. I just wanna dance, nothing really ends. rains will come down. Am I going under? Am I spinning round? Am I rising to the top, or am I spiraling down? I can feel the twist of I was trying to and my fellow broken like it's